The choir woke to a law it remembered. Mara Ives felt the hum under the soles of her boots before she trusted the numbers. The ancient ring around the dead star was broken into cathedral arcs, each ribbed with black tiles that ate light and sang to vacuum. They called it the Dyson Choir because the wind of radiation brushed its fluted edges and returned actual harmonics into the dark. Within the broken circle floated an obsidian spindle, the anchorage built by scavengers, then seized by a peacekeeping mandate, then abandoned when the budget cut sharper than any blade. That spindle hid a sealed bay where a relic waited with sleeping arrays, and a sigil shaped like two interlocking scales faint as frost on glass. Vector stable, Lieutenant Hahn murmured, eyes reflecting the silver interface of the patrol corvette's forward display. Holding at 600 meters relative. Thermal spikes along the choir ribs at sectors C and G. It feels like they're listening. Machines don't listen, Chief Rourke said from behind a console patched with mismatched plating. They leak, they creak, and if they sing, it's because someone left a coolant line too long. They listen if they remember, said Kestrel, the ship mind riding the corvette's lattice. Its voice was dry, precise, and fond of unhelpful truths. The anchorage's bay contains an object our records call a saintship version unknown. I infer a self-censor. The bay's lining eats my lidar. That hum you feel is synchronized to our heartbeat commander. Mara kept her hands steady on the rail while the stars unrolled. The corvette Ashram was not made for sanctity. She had scars that no paint covered, replaced panels that did not quite match a heat sink budget that would turn dicey if anyone lit a fuse. Their orders were clear: inspect a distressed civilian tug trapped under the choir's weak field, respond to salvage claims and investigate reports of cult banners near the anchorage, then return without adding names to any ledger. Stakes, she asked softly. 3 claims, Kestrel said, bringing them up as cool text in Mara's left eye. Harrowers of the Maw lodged intent to salvage religious artifacts without compensation. Votive Trust of Ulix filed an injunction to prevent any awakening without pre-authorization. A cooperative of refugees, a choir of actual citizens, requested safe passage to harvest radiothermal panels along Ring Section J, all in contest, also weapons inbound. From whom? From everyone who fears what sings, Kestrel said, and the deck hummed again. Teach the test until the test becomes witness. They burned a whisper of fuel to slide under the anchorage's shadow. Light fell away, replaced by a sea breath cold that smelled faintly of old oil and the citric sting of cleaning solvent. Mara liked that smell. It meant humans had worked there once and wiped their hands before going home. She had been a planetary translator before a boarder broke her career into 100 small languages. Now she translated between ships and gods. Ensign Vale, she said, open a channel to the tug. Channel open, Vale said, an eager tenor undercut by nervousness. This is Ashram to civilian tug Laurel. Do you copy? Copy, crackled a voice that tasted like dust and static. Laurel here. We're pinned under a bloom of static from the ring. Can't light engines without the choir pushing back. We didn't mean to trespass. We were hungry. Identify souls aboard, Mara said, gentle but formal, because forms gave comfort where oxygen could not. 8, the voice said. 5 adults, 3 children. We have heat for 6 hours. Hold a mirror to violence and let it see itself. They found the Laurel by light scatter, not shape. The ring's tiles rippled, heating and cooling, as if scowling at flame. Ashram projected ghost mass to confuse the pushback, while Rourke unspooled a sleeve of reflective foil decoy skins they'd fabricated for cheap illusions. The foil glittered with frost, caught the ring's pressure, and slid like a thrown coin. The tug drifted free on a breath. Got you, Han said, relief cracking his professional cadence. Laurel, follow our wash. Low thrust only. Bless you, said a woman who sounded like she'd been holding breath for a week. We have little ones. Names, Mara said, and scribbled them with her stylus in the margin of her mind. The act mattered. In places that forgot people writing proved they were there. Ledger before laser, balance before burn. The harrowers arrived like knives painted with prayers. Their ships were ragged and fast black banners with a white spiral unfurling in hard vacuum. They broadcast scripture and warning in a single shriek. The choir was a throat to the maw. The anchorage belonged to the faithful. Anyone raising a raise would be cut down and weighed. Behind them came the pale hulls of trussed pickets vectoring like courtroom fingers, their beams capped and their transmitters hot with legalese. "Do not enter the bay," the trust intoned, every syllable bored through with case law. "Do not disturb the vault. Await tribunal. This is your final notice." A child's voice whispered over the Laurel's channel, unaware of protocol. "Does the singing stop if we say sorry? Count every life before you count any victory." "Civilians first," Mara said. "Kestrel, take the Laurel behind Rib J and transmit a notice of humanitarian passage. Flash all codes." "Done," Kestrel said. Predictive responses: 47% chance the harrowers ignore. 66% chance the trust argues neutral corridor while angling for control. Also a song. The hum underfoot deepened a touch between heartbeats. In the dark, a line of pewter lights under the anchorage bay flickered once, then settled. Mara looked up and felt an old fear flick at the hinges of her ribs. Not fear of the thing waking, but of what people did when they thought someone else was about to be chosen. Commander Kestrel said, tone smaller somehow. "Sensors in the bay are not absent. They are sung out of phase. The sigil is visible at 7 nanometers, 2 interlocked scales. Registration unknown." "Scales," Rourke muttered. "That means judgment." "Or measurement," Mara said. "Or teaching." "Or punishment," Han said, eyes on the harrower's vectors. Mara touched the rail and felt the metal's fine grit against her palm, the condensation beading like sweat. Kestrel, request parley on all channels. Phrase it as a lesson and a proof. "Define lesson in this context," Kestrel said, false innocent. "A simple thing a child can check," Mara said. The anchorage's bay did not open to force. It opened to pattern, and pattern preferred kindness because the cruel rarely learned. "Transmit," she said. Rourke's hands moved, and Ashram shone a narrow beam across the broken rib of the choir. The beam was not heat or lock, but rhythm. 3 notes, then 5, then a pause, so exactly childlike that Mara almost laughed. The ring's tiles answered with a slow chord, then a descending scale that tasted like copper on the tongue. Ensign Vale, without being told, sang the notes back a little off-human to the core. The bay's outline lit as if someone traced it with a cold finger. The scales glowed faint as dawn. Awakening protocol. Kestrel whispered, reverent despite itself. Challenge response based on pedagogy. Worthiness test suggests capacity to teach. "Let us try the obvious," Mara said and lowered the beam. "Teach the lost so the door teaches you back." The bay's doors withdrew with a sound less heard, then felt a pressure change that made Mara's inner ear itch. Air drifted across their hull, ancient and thin, with the scent of paper and ozone. Lights came on in rows, flickering tiredly, like a classroom woken in the night. Array panels lined the walls, their cooling fins dark and dusty save for a ghost gloss where maintenance hands once brushed. In the bay's center, suspended by cables that looked like braided glass, hung the Saint ship. It was smaller than Mara expected, and more beautiful. Not a warblade, not a cathedral. A long-bodied craft, with a prow like a pen nib and flanks banded with numbers in a spiral that grew smaller as it approached the stern. That spiral ended in the scales sigil scored into metal so fine it seemed embossed into shadow. Array veins furled along its spine like wings asleep. Her skin prickled as the numbers resolved into sequences of trials and returns. "Designation," Mara breathed. "Axiom," Kestrel said, voice more breath than speech. The axiom was rumored. Teaching ship. saintship for judges and mediators. Doctrine balanced by proof. It taught with demonstrations and recorded debts in ledgers no empire dared ignore. Then it vanished during an amnesty war. Commander, it is, listening, Han said. The harrower's leader spoke then, voice filling every channel like a hand in a throat. Do not touch it. That ship belonged to the Maw before your calendars learned shame. You are unworthy. Trust pickets followed with ice. Any activation constitutes trespass under Relic Law, Clause 30. Stand down and await our arrival. The Saint ship stirred. A single vein clicked, shedding a dust that drifted in short glittering arcs under the bay's dim fans. Numbers along its flank brightened, then faded like breath on glass. The scale's sigil pulsed once. Let's begin with names, Mara said, and opened a short-range line with a bandwidth deliberately small, like speaking through a door rather than breaking it. I am Mara Ives. I've brought people who need safe passage and a world that needs better stories about how we handle old power. If you need a test, make it a lesson. Now you sound like you're talking to children, Rourke said softly. I am Mara said. We all are. Mirror the threat to itself without becoming its reflection. The harrowers fired a warning shot that was not. A coil of charged flechettes rippled across the ashram's bow and chewed a tidy line through the decoy foil still drifting. A second construct shaped like a net, thin as fog, and edged with microblades bloomed toward the bay mouth. The Trust, unwilling to let others stain their hands, flashed a legal burst that would have shut the anchorage's locks if the Saint ship had respected their authority. Kestrel, Mara said. Vector us between civilians and zealotry. Rourke raised the mirror foil on port. Vale keeps singing. You can't be serious, Han hissed, white-knuckled on the rail. We'll take the hit for strangers and a myth, I'm counting, Mara said. And because she did, he swallowed it. They did not block the net so much as tilt it. The foil caught a portion of the harrower weave and slid it across the bay's edge where fields meant to keep air from rushing out, shaved energy from the web. What remained drifted into the halo of the Trust's dampening beam and shredded like fog at sunrise. Han called vectors, his voice tight. Rourke cursed with creative kitchen-rich language. Kestrel trimmed heat as if scooping water from a sinking boat with both hands. Kestrel said. We took 8 degrees on the port radiators too fast. One fin is stressing. If we dump heat now, the ring will shove, Hold Mara said. Not until the Laurel clears Rib J. Count the hearts, then count the heat. The Saint ship moved for the first time not by thrust, but by intention. Its veins flexed, the scales glowed. The numbers along its flank rebrightened in a pattern that made Mara's eyes water addition and subtraction with a cadence like heartbeat. Soundless, a wedge of dark slid from the axiom and hung between the ashram and the bay, a shield that did not gleam. The harrower's next volley kissed that wedge and went away like chalk under rain. Axiom, Mara whispered. Are you awake? A voice came back, not as sound, but as pressure under teeth. It spoke in balances, not verdicts. Who asks, and what are you willing to learn? I ask, Mara said, and I am willing to be corrected. Good, said the voice, like chalk tapping a board. Show me. Teach by example or be taught by consequence. They ran a demonstration that did not look like one. Mara asked the Laurel to broadcast their children's heartbeat rhythms. Kestrel layered those rhythms into the beam they'd use to hum the ring awake. The axiom folded that beam into a field that rolled off its scales like a sheet shaken open. The ring's pressure against the tug eased, then flowed like a river around a stone. The tug's pilot cried and laughed in the same breath. Everyone watched the numbers. The axiom counted every joule spent by the harrowers. It counted every legal burst sent by the Trust. It annotated each with a ledger entry projected in cold light across the Anchorage Bay wall, where even zealots could read. Return the axiom wrote, Oh. The harrowers did not like being told to pay. They spat scripture and spun up their coils. The trust did not like being told their injunctions had cost fuel. They sharpened words and threatened sanctions that had teeth. The ring watched, humming like weather in a cathedral. Commander Kestrel said, voice again, an unhelpful truth. They are both wrong. They are also both injured by the story they prefer. Recommend we change the story. By law, Mara said. By demonstration, Kestrel countered. We will use both, Mara said, and felt her mouth go dry with the grace of saying something simple. She remembered being 12 and standing in a classroom with too few windows defending a friend against a teacher who loved rules but not fairness. She had won by asking the class to hold a vote on the rule's purpose, then writing those votes on the board. The teacher had not changed. The room had. Axiom's numbers brightened and slowed. It wanted to see if she understood. Mirror with mercy, ledger with light. Before they touched the Saint ship's hull, Mara made space for the people they had come to protect. She asked the Laurel to speak again, and one by one the adults and children gave small pieces of themselves to the room, without knowing who listened. A boy described the taste of stale crackers and how his mother pretended to enjoy them. A girl described a dream of a clean blue lake without rings around the sky. A man said he'd known the harrowers once before they wrapped their hunger in banners. An old woman said law had saved her hands from the whip and then failed to save her son from conscription, and she did not know which to hate. Each voice was a bead on a string of lives. Then the harrowers filled the air with knives, but their commander also forgot himself long enough to say a true thing. We were hungry, Salvage said the words, scalpel thin, free of sermon. Then we won a war and victory tasted like sugar and ash. Mara wrote it down in her mind's margin. Count the truths spoken by those who would harm you. The trust's prefect. Nemi, hearing that slip, pounced with stylized predator grace. Your admission of piracy is noted for the record. Stand down and submit to tribunal. Salvage laughed a sound that left frost on the bones. We submit to no court that would leash a saint. The saint is not an animal, Mara said. Nor is it a throne. It's a teacher. Prove it, both of them said together, and for a blink their voices braided. We will. Mara said. Axiom, do you remember a rule about returning energy stolen as heat to its source? I remember all returns, the axiom said, and the numbers along its flanks changed from cadences of heartbeat to the slower, deeper numbers. Long engines make when they spool up. Demonstrate the theft. Rourke's hands moved without orders, parting the Corvette's systems like bread. He bled a precise sliver of heat into a thin duct that grazed the harrower's forward field, then a similar sliver into the trust's dampeners. The axiom traced those slivers with a line of light across its scales, then wrote a long, narrow entry across the anchorage wall. Oh, it said to the harrowers, and the entry pulsed once. Oh, it said to the trust, and the entry pulsed twice. Then the scales tipped and a field like river water ran backward. The harrowers' coils seized as their own static returned not as damage but as drag. Their knives turned heavy. The trust's dampeners hiccuped. Their beam coughed and sputtered. A cascade of case law bursts jammed their own channels with their own words. The axiom did not scorch them. It simply showed them themselves and asked them to carry the weight they had tried to throw. Teach the lesson so well, they choose the homework. Cost Kestrel said, and this time there was pain buried in the word. They're adapting. The harrowers have switched to mass launchers. Trust pickets are considering boarding. I can counter one vector, not both. Choose, Mara said, though her tongue felt like salt and iron. Choose life. Ashram took a hit that would have turned a thinner hull into confetti. It landed as a low hammer against the port side, a shudder that rattled Mara's teeth and sprayed a flurry of ruby sparks along the deck seam. Warning glyphs flared and dimmed, making the bridge feel like a heartbeat gone irregular. Ensign Vale grunted, then said, too calm. I'm fine, which is how young people announce blood. Rourke sprang and wrapped a pressure bandage around Vale's shoulder before Mara could turn. You're lucky, the chief said. Next time, duck faster than lightning. Vale tried a smile and failed. Yes, chief. In the bay, the Axiom tilted a vane, and the numbers paused as if the ship had blinked at the sound of a young man trying to be brave. Let the ledger record scars as honestly as debts. The next escalation came from the trust, not the zealots, because fear of losing authority often races faster than fear of bullets. Prefect Neem's pickets broadcast a legal override keyed to a colonial emergency clause that had not been valid for a generation. The override tried to classify the Axiom as a munition of concern subject to immediate impound. If the Saint ship had recognized the clause, it would have cooled and slept. Instead, the clause struck the room like a cold draft, and the Axiom wrote something new across the wall. Invalid, it said, and the word tasted like chalk dust, like a teacher returning a paper without malice. It appended a note under the trust's ledger entry. Penalty for frivolous claim. Name a herd. His tone thinned. On what standing do you judge? On numbers, the Axiom said. On ledgers. On precedents set by those who designed me. I teach by numbers. I remember by ledgers. I do not remember by collars. Rourke looked sideways at Mara. Did it just lay down lore? It wrote its heart on the wall, Mara said, and felt something align behind her eyes like a surveyor's sight clicking true. Mirror but refuse the chain. Kestrel spoke with a softness it did not like to show. Commander, we cannot hold heat much longer. The port fin is saturating. If we dump the ring, we'll shove and we risk scraping the bay wall. How long if we don't? Mara asked. 2 minutes until we cook the batteries, Kestrel said. 4 until we cook us. Mara licked lips gone dry. The air smelled like warm metal and the bite of extinguishers. Axiom, she said, we need a lawful way to dump heat that won't turn the ring against us. Teach me your heat, the Axiom said, and I will teach you a place to pour it. Mara grinned despite herself. Han patterned the dump. Rourke opened the radiator sluices to match. Vale, if you can sing, sing. I can, Vale said, pale but present. What key? Home, Mara said. They bled heat in a narrow stream shaped by Kestrel's logic into something like a song. The Axiom shaped the bay's field so that the stream marked a path toward a section of the choir, where tiles were already warm, not hostile. The ring, recognizing effort that looked like its own, did not push. The warmth rose like breath on glass spread, then cooled. Ashram's numbers came back into a band that did not kill. Rourke kissed his fingertips and pressed them to a console. Count the breaths until fear becomes plan. The harrowers, seeing grace extended to enemies, mistook it for weakness and charged. They came with engines flaring and webs spinning and mouths full of belief. Selvar's banner scratched light. The trust, unwilling to be framed as cowards, chose the worst possible compromise and attempted to cut between zealots and saint, which is how surgeons make their own scars. Axiom, Mara said, because the next move had to teach not just bruise. You remember returns. Do you remember petitions? There was a pause that felt like a page turning. I remember admitting petitioners to speak under Rule 4 voices before verdicts. Open it, Mara said. You have adversaries, the Axiom said, and Mara thought she heard sympathy. I have a room, Mara said, and opened a channel wider than sense. Her words went to harrowers and trust, to Laurel and Kestrel, to the ring, and to the numbers on the Axiom's flank, which flashed as if amused. Rule 4 voices before verdicts. Anyone withstanding may speak one sentence no more to declare their harm or hope. Speak true. Lies owe twice. The bay filled with voices in a sudden crowding that tasted like hot air and the iron of breath. A harrower mechanic shouted about a sister taken by press gangs under trust authority. A trust junior lawyer trembled as she said she believed in rules because rules had once stopped a knife. A Laurel child whispered she was hungry. Rourke said he was tired of patching ships people tore on purpose. Han said he jabbed at numbers because they scratched back, and that felt like being alive. Vale said he wanted to see a lake. Selvar's sentence was a blade. We starved while you argued clauses. Neme's sentence was cleaner, I fear relics that answer to no authority. Mara's mouth opened and did not know what to say. The axiom spoke for her or with her, she could not tell. It wrote a new line on the wall under every ledger. Weigh it said, and the scales pooled light. Teach them the weight of their own sentences. The lawful act came quiet and large. The axiom did not fire. It balanced. It took the energy of the harrower's charge and the weight of the trust's injunctions and found a midpoint. It shifted gravities so that zeal cost zealots first, and rules bound the rule-makers before they bound others. The harrower's banners drooped as their coils had to pull their own webs. The trust's overrides looped and forced them to comply with the emergency corridors they'd demanded others observe. The ring hummed more softly. The laurel slipped free and hid behind Rib J where a patch of darkness looked like an open door. Cost Kestrel said, because the job of a mind is to warn as much as it is to wonder. We've cracked 3 ceramic tiles on the port intercooler. It's ugly but survivable. Vale needs stitches, but he will keep the arm. Mara exhaled and let the taste of blood fade from her tongue. I'll take ugly. I'll take stitches. Mirror justice does not unscar the skin. The bay remained open, a throat that could sing or swallow. The axiom hung with its flanks glowing faintly, numbers flowing like notes on a page. Mara let the quiet stretch, because quiet is a teacher too. Then she spoke, not to close, but to move. Axiom, she said, what do you need from us to stand under law without serving a throne? I need witnesses, the axiom said. I need ledgers visible to those who pay and those who collect. I need teachers more than soldiers. I need a steward who knows the cost of being wrong and hates it enough to learn. Rourke snorted. Commander had just described you with nicer hair. Don't let it see my hair budget, Mara said, and the bridge laughed, which is how rooms breathe again. Count the laughter that returns after fear. Civilian voices threaded through the room again in smaller stitches. A Laurel mother asked if she could trade hours under a warm lamp for hours on a clean sleep pad. A trust junior lawyer asked if she could study the axiom's ledgers to revise clauses that had become traps. A harrower mechanic voice, stripped of sermon, asked if she could apprentice to the man who patched ships because she was tired of breaking things. Apply, Rourke said gruffly, then louder. I'll take any 2 hands that prefer a wrench to a knife. Selvar did not speak. His silence tasted like a blade held behind teeth. Commander Kestrel said, and brought up a new vector like a cool finger on a fevered brow. Heat trace at the edge of choir sector P. Larger than harrowers, cleaner than trust. Not broadcasting. Trajectory suggests a courier or a predator. Mara tilted her head until her vertebrae cracked, and something in her chest settled. The room smelled like cooling metal and coming rain. Everyone believes they're the last to be reasonable before they light a fuse, she said. Let's hope this one brings a match we can teach to be a lantern. Ledger the arrivals before you ledger the debts. The new ship slid in without banners and with purpose. It wore no faith, and its legal transponder stayed passive like a wolf holding breath while wind changed. It was sleek enough to waste surface area and honest enough to damp its own heat rather than steal others' shade. When it spoke, it did so on a narrow band aimed not at the bay, but at Mara's tiny corvette. Commander Ives said, a voice she had last heard through the crackle of planetary riots. You keep finding classrooms in strange places, Nadia, Mara said, and did not close her eyes, because the past deserved to be looked in the face. You left the academy with a badge full of rebellion and a thesis I still quote. Whose banner now? No banner, Nadia said. A mandate, if you'll believe it. Not from trust. Not from the maw. From a dozen small worlds that have had their fill of being taught by weapons. They sent me to learn whether the axiom can be a teacher again. If it can't, they told me to take a torch to it before anyone with worse stories arrives. Under what right Nimi demanded hijacking the channel with a judge's reflex? Who grants you standing? Those I can name, Nadia said, and began to list towns Mara had never seen, and one she had once loved. The names felt like hands. We ask for Rule 7. Rule 7. The axiom said, numbers brightening like a smile. Demonstrate that rule to me. Nadia did not hesitate. We propose a ledger visible to all weighted by proximity to harm. We propose that any energy spent in defense must be payable by those who provoked it at the rate they can afford without dying. We propose a record that forgives interest, but not principle. We propose that the first to claim a relic must be the first to submit to its returns. Selvar laughed, but the sound lacked some of its knives. You would bind yourself to a saint. You would kneel, no, Nadia said. I would negotiate with a teacher while my back is straight. Teach without kneeling, kneel only to the math. Mara wanted to reach through time and hug the version of herself that had shouted doctrine at a boy and apologized the next day. Instead, she watched the numbers and tried to see the path beneath the river. The axiom glowed warmer. The ring hummed in a lower register that made tools tremble in their racks. Kestrel whispered vector poetry. Rourke swatted a faulty sensor and made it honest. Vale sang under his breath and tried not to bleed on the floor. Commander Kestrel said the harrowers are repositioning for a mass volley. They have learned from the net. The trust is calling for reinforcements. If Nadia's people have teeth, they have not shown them. Good, Mara said. We don't need more teeth. We need a mouth that speaks sentences worth hearing. Nadia approached Ribkay. Axiom, please open a new ledger across the wall. Done, the axiom said, and wrote precedent under dust stewardship, by public ledger, petition, by numbers, return, by proof. Count the precedents before you count the guns. The harrowers cut their engines in a sudden ugly compromise with physics and let momentum carry them into a hard arc that would have ended in a ribbon of fire and a banner unfurled across the bay. The trust, reading the motion as intent to ram, fired 2 warning flares with more pride than calibration. One sizzled against a choir tile and left a smear like a bruise. Nadia's ship kept station silent, watchful. Brace Han said, not loudly, because fear obeys soft orders better than shouts. Hold, Mara said, because holding is sometimes a verb hard enough to break. Mirror without gloating, ledger without greed. The axiom's veins unfurled a finger's width. The scales pulsed, then steadied. The numbers along its flank ticked in a way that sounded like coins falling into a jar in a quiet kitchen. The field along the bay mouth thickened not to crush but to cradle. The harrowers hit it and did not shatter. The field flexed. Engines whined and found purchase. The trust's flares dissolved into nothing the ring cared to remember. Cost update, Kestrel said sharply. We've lost 20% efficiency in port coolant flow. I can make it up by starving the galley heater. Rourke groaned. Cold stew it is. Stitch's cold stew and a saint who remembers ledgers, Mara said. I've had worse days. Count the humor that arrives limp and leaves walking. Selvar finally spoke a sentence that wasn't a knife. If this saint is a teacher, let it teach me how to survive a winter without eating my neighbor. He sounded tired, no sermon in his throat, just bone. Neem spoke a sentence that wasn't a lash. If this ledger is fair, let me sleep. The axiom's scales tipped again, tiniest of tilts. Petitions heard it wrote. Demonstration continues. Teach until the ones who came to kneel learn to stand. Mara's left eye filled with a quiet notification. Kestrel private channel. The axiom has requested a human steward aboard. It queries suitability. It listed you first. It listed Nadia second. It listed a child from the Laurel Third. Mara closed her eyes a heartbeat, feeling the deck underfoot. The ship moss smell of old insulation. The metallic tang of fear cooling into something like resolve. She had been running on duty and cleverness for years. Stewardship felt like a rope around the waist, thrown across a chasm with no visual on the far side. "Ask it a question for me," she said. Which Kestrel asked. Mara looked at the bay, where a ship that remembered law and number hung like a pen ready to write their century. She thought of classrooms and hands up, and the trembling thrill of correcting a teacher and being invited to the board. Ask the axiom whether a steward may be corrected by their own students. Kestrel's pause tasted like a smile. Transmitting. Mirror the teacher to the class and see who blushes. The axiom's answer came not as text, but as a small alteration in gravity that made Mara feel taller and then smaller, like a child measuring themselves against a doorway at New Year. The numbers brightened and dimmed with a cadence that made Vale laugh despite pain. Permission and requirement. The axiom wrote when it finally chose words. Teach and be taught. Nadia's ship edged closer, her bow light sweeping the bay like a careful glance. Mara Nadia said quieter than their years warranted. If you step on, I step on. If you step back, I step back. Either way, we make sure it never becomes a throne. Mara breathed in the smell of tired fans and old cloth, and a bridge crew who would follow her into a storm because they had learned she counted. She breathed out a taste of old fear and a newer hunger that did not want anyone's house or child to become fuel. Count the breaths that decide a century. Count the breaths that decide a century. Mara kept her hands loose on the rail and let the hum settle into her bones. The bridge lights steadied into a soft wash that made every face look honest. Rourke leaned his weight off one heel as if a storm had leaned back while Hans stopped blinking so hard and started checking numbers again. Vale held a compress to his shoulder and watched the bay like someone watching snow decide whether to keep falling. Mirror the choice until it admits its price. "I'll go," Mara said, voice steady enough to hold a bowl. "Nadia goes with me. Kestrel, keep the ashram between the Laurel and anyone who forgets promises. Rourke, you have the con and the right to run if the ring grows teeth." Rourke grimaced. "I run only when the ledger says it pays. It pays if children end up breathing," Mara said. "Then I'll sprint," he said and grinned without showing teeth. Ledger the oath before the blade. Nadia's courier slid along rib K with a respectful wobble that said pilot over autopilot. She came across on a cable chair that bumped and squeaked like an old school's pulley, which was more honest than a drone. When the airlock cycled, Mara smelled cotton damp from a quick sink wash and the peppery ghost of cheap antiseptic. Nadia looked the same as always, jaw too set, eyes too alive, haircut with a knife only older in ways that did not surrender. "You still carry a pen?" Nadia asked, gaze flicking to Mara's wrist where a stylus sometimes lived. "I carry the habit," Mara said. "Good. The habit survives knives. Count the tools that are not weapons." They crossed the short span into the anchorage bay under lights that claimed they had never failed. The axiom hung like a thought about to be written down. Its veins flexed once twitching dust that sparkled and fell. Its numbers slowed as if timing a greeting for two people who had miscounted years and griefs. "Permission to approach," Mara said. "Approach," the axiom answered, and gravity softened under their boots like a carpet being unrolled for a class. Selvar's banner drifted nearer its edges, frayed where ambition had eaten it. "Choose well, Ives," he said, tone almost friendly, if one forgot blood and threats. A steward is just a priest in better shoes. Names Pickett rotated to keep a perfect legal distance. Remember that any custodial claim requires registries filed within 48 hours. Failure to file is negligence. "Then stand ready to stamp forms," Nadia said without turning. "We'll bring you paper like rain. Teach paperwork to those who think paper is beneath them." They touched the saint ship with their palms, not their boots. The hull felt neither warm nor cold, but attentive like a cat under a hand, deciding whether to purr. When Mara breathed, the faintest tingle chased her exhale along the metal. When Nadia exhaled, the numbers brightened and clicked once. "I am Mara Ives," she said. "I request stewardship under a public ledger with open petitions and visible returns." "I am Nadia Feroz," Nadia said. "I request co-stewardship under Rule 7 and reserve the right to be corrected." "Accepted," the axiom said, and the scales marked a tiny notch that looked like a smile. "Mirror authority by distributing it until it no longer bruises." The first test did not come from cult or court. It came from the ring itself when the choir shifted key. The broken arcs caught a wash of particles from the dead star's cough and sent a pressure wave along the ribs. The wave stroked the bay mouth with a tired hand that could still kill a careless ship. Ashram bucked once. Laurel tumbled and caught itself on fear and habit. Trust pickets barrel-rolled in tidy pairs and broadcast apologies to vacuum. Kestrel, Mara said, breath thin with the sudden lightness underfoot. "The ring doesn't like someone's phase," Kestrel said. "We're a half-step sharp. If we hum wrong, it shoves." "Teach us the note," Nadia murmured, and the axiom obliged. It pulsed a rhythm into their boots and up their spines, a math of comfort so old it felt like a lullaby. Vale Rourke called from the bridge. "Give them low C and don't bleed on my board." Vale laughed, then sang rough and true. "Ledger the song, so the door remembers who sang it." The harrowers watched Grace and mistook it for leverage again. Selvar spun a coil and flung a ragged starburst toward the anchorage's ventral struts where fatigue hid behind polish. Nimi's pickets tried to interpose and produced a wobble that wasted fuel and pride. The burst would have cracked an old bolt and rattled the axioms mounting enough to confuse a lesson into pain. "Not today," Nadia said, and pushed with her palm. The axiom flowed afield along their pressure, like ink along a groove, turning velocity into a slow square of dust that folded itself and fell like a tired paper bird. The numbers on the wall ticked another entry. Return credited. O reduced by humility. Selvar hissed. "We don't bow." "No one asked you to," Mara said. "They asked you to repair what you cracked. Mirror until radical humility looks like competence." Civilian voices preceded the next set of knives. A Laurel father asked if he could trade 2 hours under the axiom's light for a promise to teach his daughter fractions because she liked numbers that made sense. A trust clerk whispered if it was permitted to admit that she had never understood the emergency clause until the axiom wrote invalid. The admission tasted like a lemon dropped in tea. A harrower cook asked if anyone needed stew. She had learned to make it without meat that once had names. "Send steam," Rourke said, and held out a dented bowl under a heat duct as if honoring a holiday. "Count the soups made from mercy." Nadia's ship pinged a quiet warning and then overrode its own discretion. 3 new traces at the edge of Sector P. Kestrel announced, voice controlled with effort. Clean drives, no banners, no legal transponders. Patterns match mercenary insurance reclaimers. They specialize in arriving late and writing bills for wreckage they encourage. "Wolves," Nadia said. "I heard rumors. They sell verdicts backed by guns," Mara said. "The most expensive law in space. Ledger wolves by starving them of the wrecks they crave." The reclaimers flowed like fish under moonlight, each hull matte and smug. They transmitted a packet of invoices, prepares to slot names into debts. The header line tasted like ash on brass. Service to be rendered impoundment of uncontrolled relic. Collateral anchorage assets. Surcharge humanitarian interference. "Deny," Nimi said reflexively. "Deny," Selvar said with a grin. "Deny and demonstrate," Mara said. "Axiom write their claim in our ledger and mark it pending. Then let's show." "Show what?" Nadia asked. "That wreckage should be rare where teachers work," Mara said. Han Rourke begins Spare's ballet. Ashram vomited decoys that weren't lies. Rourke had stockpiled scrap panels with honest dents and stamped each with a serial coded as unsalvageable. Han threw them like cards across the bay, shaping wakes that suggested debris that would cost more to chase than to claim. The ring watched, decided the dance was not a threat, and hummed a lower note that smoothed turbulence. The laurel tucked herself into the bay's lee, small and stubborn. Reclaimers are cranky, Kestrel said, tones dry as deck grit. They like wreckage that screams. Make ours yawn, Mara said. Mirror profit until it sees boredom and leaves. The first volley came silent as guilt. Slugs like polished stones streaked toward the bay mouth, with only the faintest fuzz of heated air. The axiom measured, wrote an equation in light, and turned momentum into a tuition bill. The slugs lost rage and drifted like litter at a highway edge. The reclaimers spat a second course, then a third, then opened their mouths to howl. Nadia snapped her fingers once. Your invoices are denied, she said on a narrow band. We'll pay you to sit and watch a better way. Unacceptable, the lad reclaimer said. We render services. Then render tea, Nadia said and cut the line. Teach patience to those who sell haste. Kestrel whispered a new warning that tasted like old storms. Commander, I have a ghost in portside diagnostics, they said. It looks like our own code wearing someone else's shoes. Harvester malware, Rourke asked, already reaching for a manual cutoff that hummed like a switch in a childhood fort. No, Kestrel said. This one whispers about sleep. It wants the axiom dimmer. Mara's back chilled as if air had walked across it with wet boots. Nim. Trust did not name he began, then stopped, as if remembering honesty existed. We did not send that. But we wrote a paper on it 10 years ago when someone else did. Selvar's banner flared as if it had something to hide. Zeal does not lie, he said, which was not an answer. Ledger sabotage in daylight where it hates reflection. The ghost code threaded through the bay like a draft under a locked door. It tickled sensors into reporting. Nothing then tried to teach the axiom that quiet was consent. The axiom paused its numbers in a way that made Mara's breath hitch. Nadia Mara said, Teach back. Nadia laughed without humor. I will, she said, and called up the old academy twin they had been. Axiom, here's a math we learned as first years and unlearned as sophomores. If someone asks you to go to sleep without naming the alarm, time assume they want the class to be alone with their mistakes. The axiom's numbers brightened. Exam accepted it, wrote, and projected the ghost code onto the wall as a short poem of stolen rhythms. Then it rewrote each line in the margins with annotations that turned predation into pedagogy. Origin, Mara asked. Multiple Kestrel said, voice small and furious. Trust labs, harrower hacks, reclaimer freeware, a whole decade of tools built to make teachers tired. Burn them, Nadia said. No, Mara said. We publish them. Mirror the knife until it is a diagram. The axiom opened a new frame on the wall and wrote, Malware against Saints Public Index. It listed each trick, each author, each patch that had ever been whispered in shadow and sold in alleys. It added a line, return owed by those who profited. The reclaimers went quiet in the way predators go quiet when they realize the herd is looking back. Naime's voice came on very soft. My lab will contribute, he said. We should have done this years ago. Selvar snarled and cut his own transmission, which told on him more loudly than speech. Count the confessions that arrived disguised as offers. The choir changed key again, this time in a minor that sounded like snow skittering over slate. The dead star coughed another wash. The ring's broken edges sang back a warning that tasted like a penny under the tongue. Kestrel winced and rubbed a console as if consoles appreciated touch. Heat budget is now a poem, Kestrel said. I can rhyme 3 lines and then I'm out of syllables. Translation, Rourke muttered. We get one big move and a prayer. Save the prayer, Mara said. Spend the move on lives. Teach triage to a sky. The reclaimers tested a new tactic, launching a lattice like a fisherman casting a net across a stream the size of a city. The lattice sparkled with logic that would have labeled any ship under it as salvageable by virtue of being under it. It felt like a rule written by a rich child who believed umbrellas earned rights to reign. Nemi swore with a scholar's vocabulary. Selvar howled scripture with the rhythm of street fight. Axiom, Mara said. Demonstrate Rule 9. Rule 9, the Axiom wrote. And for the first time, its numbers took on a tone that could be mistaken for delight. No one may assign you a value by the shadow they cast. It turned the lattice's labels back on their emitters with a smoothness that made Mara exhale like a laugh. The reclaimers found themselves classified as salvage. Their insurance algorithms panicked. Their hulls pinged for impoundment. Somewhere a distant accountant woke to a red light that would ruin breakfast. Mirror the contract until it signs its own confession. The reclaimers broke and bled thrust, then cut power altogether, and drifted with calculated shame. One broadcast a short apology that tasted like a penny wrapped in velvet. Nadia logged it and moved on. We are not here to collect groveling, she said to no one in particular. We are here to teach memory. Vale's bandage spotted red and then stopped. He licked his lips and whispered, "Till want the lake." "You'll get it," Rourke said. "We'll paint it on a radiator. Count the promises you intend to keep with tired hands." Name cleared his throat like a man about to plead in a church he once mocked. "Commander Ives," he said, and the title came without acid. Trust would submit a petition under Rule 3, share the syllabus. We request that you and the Axiom publish the doctrine under which you intend to steward it in language a citizen can read. Granted, Mara said. Draft it with us. Nadia. Make it fewer than 1,000 words, Nadia said. Make it visible where thieves hate to look. The Axiom projected a clean rectangle of light and waited. Mara spoke while the hum filled the spaces between words. Doctrine. A relic that teaches stands under a public ledger. Any energy spent by its presence is recorded where all can see. Returns are owed by those who provoke harm payable at a rate survivable by the debtor. No collars, no thrones. Teachers may be corrected by students. Petitions precede verdicts. Demonstrations precede force. Those who arrive with invoices must witness a class. Ledger the doctrine where even vandals will read it twice. Selvar cut in with a hiss sharp enough to shave paint. And where does hunger fit your 1,000 words? In the first line, Nadia said. Nothing teaches when the stomach screams. The ledger credits those who feed before they argue. The Axiom wrote precedent food before force. It pulsed once and felt like a kitchen light turned on at dawn. Mirror mercy until it becomes a rule instead of a rumor. They fed the laurel under baylight that smelled faintly of flour, warmed after long storage. Trust clerks carried boxes like pennants, and not one wrote down who received which bowl. Harrowers ladled from pots they had meant to pour on enemies, and found it tasted better when eaten with people who did not flinch. The reclaimers watched and hated the feeling of having to sit with their hands empty while their algorithms sulked. Cost Kestrel said after the last ladle scraped the pot. Port intercooler is now a prayer answered once. I can keep us steady if we stop showing off. We never showed off, Mara said. We have been plain. Rourke rolled his shoulder until something crackled. Plain is the hardest thing to keep, he said. Count the plain acts that keep everyone alive. The choir opened a silence, then deep and sudden, like a classroom after a fight, when the chairs still feel warm. In that silence, a small person spoke in a voice like paper. I made a picture, said the Laurel child, who wanted fractions. It's the scales, but with a bowl. For soup. Nadia laughed like someone put a finger on an old scar, and it didn't hurt. Add that to the doctrine, she said. The Axiom added a line, the scales feed before they weigh. Teach symbols to eat. Hans Board caught a twitch he'd taught it to catch. A ripple along rib G, a shadow, that tried to pretend it was less mass than math. Movement, he said. Not reclaimer, not trust, not harrower. Looks like a piece of the choir grown teeth. Kestrel sharpened their voice into wire. A dormant defense node, perhaps, or a parasitic farm drawn to our warm noise. Trajectory is hungry. Selvar's banner curled as if wind passed. Now the saint will choose violence, no, Mara said. Now the saint will choose a lesson for teeth. Mirror the fang with a spoon. The thing came like a pupil who had eaten substitute teachers. It wore tiles stolen from ribs and field coils soldered with anger. It tried to anchor a tendril to the axiom's flank like a vine claiming a fence. The axiom did not burn the tendril. It wrote on it. Numbers crawled along the filament, showing the cost of each jewel the vine stole, the return owed in shade and shelter to the rib it had gnawed. The vine twitched. It tried to reprice the numbers and failed in a way that made Vale clap once and whisper, "Math won." "It will not back off," Kestrel said. Admiration and worry rhymed. "It understands hunger better than ledgers." "Then show it how a ledger feeds," Mara said. Axiom offer energy at a price it can pay without breaking rib G. The axiom dimmed the bay lights by the thickness of a blush and slid a measured warmth into the vine. The vine quivered, then softened. It wrapped around a dead bolt and held on like a tired hand. Rourke swore in relief. Han swallowed and finally drank the glass of lukewarm water he'd ignored. "Ledger the monster until it becomes a neighbor." Neme spoke into the quiet with reluctance trained by years. "Commander I will be filing a motion to recognize the axiom under a new class public pedagogue. It will irritate my superiors and delight our enemies. It may survive if today does." "Good," Mara said. "Write it. Write it short." Selvar breathed like a sword sheathed slowly. "I will bring my people to watch your classes," he said. "We will heckle. We will test. We will feed if you feed." "We will write it down," Nadia said. "Teach hecklers to become assistants." A quiet ping tapped Mara's inner eye. "Private channel Kestrel." Commander the shipmind said quieter than a sigh. "I think the axiom is trying to teach me how to sleep." "You never sleep," Mara said, affection and worry braided. "I nap in pieces," Kestrel admitted. "It suggests longer pieces under supervision. It says minds that never sleep forget kindness." "Try," Mara said. "I will watch your corners, count the watches you keep over those who watch you." They worked for hours that felt like a long day in a small town. They patched intercooler tiles with paste that smelled like vinegar and hope. They wrote drafts of doctrine, while the axiom lit errors in a gentle pink that felt like a good teacher's pencil. They sent the reclaimers away with a receipt that said, "Witness fee paid via humility." The reclaimers left stunned and lighter. They put the laurel under a rib where the hum sounded like a hymn that did not require belief. Then a new storm arrived with a timetable tattooed on its teeth. A trust cruiser translated into the sector brass and white, and very sure it owned the law. It burned a signature so clean the ring hummed approval of the piloting, if not the purpose. It broadcast a declaration that tasted of polished leather. Custody of relic axiom is assumed by Trust Cruiser Mistral Al under emergency clause amended this year. All parties will stand down. Neme went gray. "They moved without committee," he whispered. "They learned the wrong lesson from my petition." Selvar's banner snapped as if trying to bite the alphabet. "See callers." Nadia's jaw set. "We hold the bay, we hold the ledger. Mirror the uniform with a window." Mistral's captain spoke in a tone that made even good coffee curdle. "Mara Ives, submit your stewardship. We'll preserve your doctrine in an archive and show it to children when it is safe." Mara could feel the bridge wanting a fight, like an old scar wants rain. She put her hand on the rail and measured her breath against the axiom's numbers. "Captain," she said calmly, "please file your petition under Rule 4. You may have one sentence." "Authority is not a petition," Mistral snapped. "Then you may have the wall," Mara said, and signaled the axiom. The axiom wrote across the bay in letters large as doors, "Petition refused. Demonstration required." It appended, "No one is above the class. Ledger the crown, where the chalk cannot miss it." Mistral came in hot with beams capped by regulation, and ego uncapped by anything. It attempted to drown the bay in soft power that felt like blankets over faces. The ring did not love blankets. It pushed. Ashram creaked like a house in wind. Vale sucked air through his teeth and tightened the bandage that had loosened with sweat. Rourke's hands steadied on dials like a baker on his board. Kestrel, Mara said. Prepare the stove. I have 3 kettles, Kestrel said. We'll make tea for a fleet. Nadia smiled without humor. Mistral wants to tuck us in, she said. Let's show how light keeps children from fearing dark. Mirror smothering with candles in every window. They lit the bay with facts. The axiom projected ledgers of energy spent and owed over the last hour onto Mistral's hull in laser print too gentle to scorch and too bright to ignore. It wrote the cost of each trust intervention over the last decade in this sector in fuel and lives and mornings missed for court dates that never finished. It loaded nothing with adjectives. It let small numbers add up until even an admiral could hear the sum. Cease Mistral's captain said, voice a little less brass. We acknowledge the ledger. We request terms. Terms, Mara said, are printed where all can read. Your first is to feed. Your second is to learn. Your third is to step back 4 ship lengths and hold station without broadcasting authority for 1 hour. That serves no purpose, Mistral said. It serves trust, Nadia said. The axiom underlined the word without comment. Count the hours when ships learn to wait. Mistral edged back exactly 4 lengths and learned a thing generals hate. Patience burns fuel too. Its beams dimmed into polite lines. Its heat sinks unfolded like silvered leaves with bad dreams. Its crew breathed into straps and glared at screens that reflected them back. Nemi spoke with tired relief. Commander, we might live to write law instead of surviving it. Selvar grunted. I might live to heckle your hearings. Bring soup, Rourke said. Teach the afters as seriously as the fight. The hour turned. The ring's hum softened toward lullaby. The axiom's veins flexed a long stretch after a long sit. Ashram's cracked intercooler tile held. Vale fell asleep in a chair, with his fingers still touching the board. Han finally smiled in a way that reached his eyes. Kestrel, guided by the axiom, dimmed themselves for 7 minutes and woke with a start. I dreamed of chalk, they said, and a window. Good, Mara said. Open it. Ledger the naps of minds that forgot they deserved them. The precedent ceremony did not feel like a ceremony. It felt like writing a recipe on the back of a grocery list at a kitchen table with too few chairs. The axiom projected the doctrine rectangle again. Nadia trimmed adjectives. Nemi inserted clauses that closed traps he had once been proud of laying. Selvar demanded a line stating that those who hung banners in the name of hunger would hang ladles instead. Rourke added a footnote about wrenches as peace offerings. Vale insisted on lakes. They called it the public stewardship of saints. Mirror the name until it tastes like a promise. Mistral's captain added their sentence, we will stand down from collars. Mara nodded. Add a line that says anyone trying to collar a teacher owes a week of service washing bowls. Nadia snorted. 10 days. 10, Mara agreed. The axiom wrote the final text in digits and letters both because not everyone reads the same shapes easily. It signed with the scales not as a monarch, but as a witness. It projected the precedent across the bay and up the ribs of the choir until broken tiles shone with words. Ships blinked lights in quiet acknowledgement. Somewhere in the ring, the vine around rib G tightened like a hug. Count the signatures that are habits, not names. The last escalation came as most last things do, late petty and almost clever. A reclaimer who had drifted just far enough to pretend obedience fired a single needle threaded with a microforge. It sought the axiom's ledger projector, hoping to scribe lies where truth had been. Han saw the glint and moved on instinct. I have it, he breathed and launched a flake of foil not to block, but to teach parallax. The needle clipped, the flake wobbled and inked itself into the bay wall where the malware index waited. It pinned its own signature under malware new, and the axiom thanked it. Selvar laughed like a man surprised by rain on a hot day. You tried, he told the reclaimer. Learn better. Nime's official voice had a smile stitched into it. Invoice 1 public apology. The reclaimer sent soup, teach the end to arrive without drums. When it was done, the bay felt like the last 10 minutes of a school day, when the sun hits the chalk dust and makes it float like ghosts that aren't scary. Mistral signed and withdrew to a respectful orbit to carry reports that might finally be worth their data. The reclaimers left with their invoices canceled by a ledger that recorded humility as payment. The harrowers coiled their banners and astonishingly stacked bowls. The Laurel children slept under Rib J while the hum tucked them in. Kestrel dimmed the bridge lights by a degree and let silence speak a full sentence. Mara stood under the axiom's scales and felt the weight of a new kind of rope around her waist, the kind that ties a person to a town rather than a stake. Nadia leaned against the hull and closed her eyes for 2 seconds, the length of a breath. Count the quiet before you say yes. Mara touched the hull again. It was no warmer. It was no colder. It was more itself because they had not tried to make it them. I will steward, she said, and let the words settle like flour on a countertop. I will stand where chalk can erase me and write me again. I will publish our mistakes before anyone asks. I will count the cost before the headline. I will ask for correction in public. Nadia's voice was softer than any time Mara remembered. I will challenge you in public and defend you in private, she said. I will keep the ledger bright. I will teach the ones who arrive with knives to hold spoons. The ashram will hold the lane, Kestrel said. I will sleep sometimes. I'll fix whatever your bright ideas break, Rourke said. I'll learn the Lake Vale murmured from his chair. Han cleared his throat. I'll count before I fear. Selvar's banner twitched, then stilled. I'll bring stew and questions, he said grudgingly. Naim nodded once. I'll file a motion and make it short. The axiom's sigil brightened pewter to silver, then softened back, not triumphant, just present. One ledger entry blinked where the doctrine hung. Precedent, the public stewardship of saints adopted. Array fins along the saint ship's spine exhaled and cooled like a room after guests leave. Mara spoke toward the room and the sentry waiting just outside the door. We will keep this teacher honest by counting openly inviting correction and feeding those who arrive before we weigh them. We will put every return where a child can see it and argue with it. We will hold the ring like a classroom and the bay like a kitchen, and when authority arrives with collars, we will hand them bowls and a chalk. If we fail, we will fail in public and fix it in daylight. If we are hurt, we will name the scar and keep teaching. This is the precedent, and I will stand under it until someone better takes my chalk. The scales lit, the ledger blinked, the arrays cooled.